Good morning, seventh grade. This lesson is the conclusion to chapter 9. So I'm hoping that you have your book out and that you can follow along with me. I am on page 140. We kind of stopped right in the middle of the page because the timer went off yesterday, and I wanted to leave that at 20 minutes. We have 3 questions left to answer, so let's take a look at them real quick so you know what we're looking for. Question 7, we're about to get that answer right now. What did Jenny think was bothering Jethro? Question 8, what did Jethro do to solve his problem with Eb? And 9, from whom did Jethro get an important letter and what did it say? Okay, so if you would please get your book out and follow along with me. As I said, we are on page 140. We are down at the very bottom. Jethro had just been thinking about how he felt about harboring Eb. He was very confused in this situation, and he remembered that man at the barn raising saying to him, "Good thing you don't have anything to worry about." And clearly, not only has he become the man of the house or man of the farm, but now he has to make a difficult decision, and it would not be fair for him to put that decision up to his father to answer. So at the bottom, we're starting where we see Jenny. Jenny noticed his preoccupation at supper that night. She waited until the others were out of the kitchen and she and Jethro were left alone. "What is it that's on your mind, Jeth?" "Nothing, just tired." He threw himself down in front of the fireplace and closed his eyes. He knew it would be hard to deceive his sister. There was a determination about Jenny. "You'd better tell me, Jeth. I'll find out, you know." "You don't give me any worry. There's nothing to find out." "Jeth, have you had some news about Shad or John?" "No, how could I? You know what mail has come." "You might have talked to someone." "Well, I ain't. Not to anyone that knows a word about Shad or John." She worked at her dishpan for a while in silence. Then she walked over and poked him a little with the toe of her shoe. "There's something, Jeth. Nancy noticed it too. Now I want to know, is it something about Eb? Is he here with the deserters?" He turned his head away from her. He couldn't remember when he had lied to Jenny, and he wasn't sure that he could do it well. "Jenny, you vex me when I'm not feeling so well. Can't I have an upset stomach without you firing a passel of questions at me?" She stood looking down at him thoughtfully for a while, and then an idea stemming from experience with older brothers suddenly struck her. She dropped down beside him and whispered her suspicion gleefully in his ear. Jeth Crichton, have you been smoking on the sly? Is that what's given you an upset stomach?" He kept his eyes closed and did not answer. Knowing his silence would confirm her guess, Jenny was triumphant. "That's it. I know it without you saying it," she crowed. "You look white the way Tom and Eb did once when they tried it." It was very simple to lie without words. He merely opened his eyes and grinned sheepishly at her. So what does she think's bothering him? She almost guessed it. But instead, he comes back with "Oh, my stomach's bothering me. Can't you leave me alone?" And then all of a sudden she thinks, "Oh, he's been smoking, being sneaky." "I'm surprised you would be that silly, Jeth. With so much spring work to do, you don't have the time to get sick over smoking." She shook her head. "How do you expect to keep going when you didn't more than touch your meal tonight?" He seized the opportunity to get some food for Eb without detection. "Would you fix me a little bread and meat and slip it up to my room later on, Jenny? I'll likely feel better after a while, and I'm going to be hungry when I do." She sighed, but with a certain satisfaction. There was an adventurous streak in Jenny. She would have liked to try smoking herself if she had dared, and she was a little amused that her sober young brother had been tempted in this direction of most young males. Jethro lay awake in the room that night and wrestled with his problem. He wondered if, after all, it wouldn't be better to ask his father's advice, but he decided against that almost immediately and as firmly as he rejected the idea that afternoon. He wondered about Ross Milton, but there was little chance to make a trip to Newton at this time of year. What about Ed Turner? Staunch, level-headed neighbor. No, Ed had 2 sons in the Army. It wouldn't do to lay this responsibility upon Ed's shoulders. He thought of Eb's words. You nor no one else can help me now, not even old Abe himself. Old Abe, Mr. Lincoln, Mr. President, not even Mr. Lincoln himself. Jethro turned restlessly in his bed. What if one put it up to Mr. Lincoln? What if one said, I will abide by the word of him who is highest in this land? But wasn't the word already known? Wasn't the word from the highest in the land just this? Turn in deserters or there will be terrible trouble for you and your family? But Mr. Lincoln was a man who looked at problems from all sides. Mr. Lincoln was not a faraway man like General McClellan or Senator Sumner or Secretary of State Seward. Mr. Lincoln had plowed fields in Illinois. He had thought of the problems men came up against. He was not ready to say everything on this side of the line is right and everything on the other side is wrong. But would one dare? A nobody? A boy on a southern Illinois farm? Would he dare? Mr. Lincoln held the highest office in the land. But would he think? Would it vex him that a boy from southern Illinois could be so bold? And anyway, how could one say it? What manner of words could one use so as not to be too forward, too lacking in respect toward the President of the United States? Jeth realized he was not going to be able to go to sleep. There was a candle in his room. There was some ink and an old pen that Bill had sometimes used. There was also Ross Milton's book, the book on English usage. Jethro got up in the quiet of the night, lighted his candle, opened Ross Milton's book, and began to write on a piece of rough-lined paper. The next morning, he hid Jenny's sandwiches inside his coat, and at the barn, he picked up a few eggs from the nest up in the loft. He dug an apple out of the straw in the apple cave. No one would question that. A boy needed something to munch on in mid-morning. He would like to have taken some coffee beans. A man lying out in the woods all night needed a hot drink. But that item was one he would not take. Not for Eb, not even for Bill or Shad would he have taken his mother's coffee. Good choice. He knew where there were good sassafras roots in the woods. Maybe he would burn some brush in the fence rows and heat a little water for sassafras tea. He filched an old kettle and 2 lumps of sugar just in case. So filched kind of like snuck and stole, but he'll return them. Eb was feeling a little better that morning. The quilts Jethro had taken from Nancy's house had made the long night more comfortable. He had washed himself in the creek and looked refreshed. You've brung me a feast, Jeth, he said gratefully. They sat together for a while and talked in low voices. I'll be getting out in a day or so, Jeth. I can't have you taking all this risk. If you could go back to the Army, you would, wouldn't you, Eb? You're asking a man, if he had a chance to live, would he take it? But I've told you, Jeth, a deserter can't go back. I'll be hunted for the rest of my days, but the rest of my days aren't going to be too many. Jethro said nothing, but as he plowed that morning, he made up his mind to send the letter. Who did he write that letter to? Abraham Lincoln, right? It was a frightening thing to do. But if one did nothing, well, that was frightening too. He knew Eb was not really planning to leave. Eb was a lost and frightened boy, and there was nowhere else to go. For Jethro, there was nothing to do but send the letter. The plowshares needed sharpening. Jethro told his father that noon. Hadn't he better drive over to Hidalgo and get that work done? He'd pick up the mail, too, for themselves and for Ed Turner. Was that all right with his father? Matt seldom questioned Jethro's decisions. The boy was doing a man's work. He was due the dignity according to a man. Matt assented. He agreed to the trip readily. And Jethro, with the letter in his pocket, drove off down the road, his heart pounding with excitement. In Hidalgo, the old man who took care of the mail glanced sharply at Jethro when he noticed the inscription on the envelope. But he was a silent man with problems of his own. As long as the letter was properly stamped and addressed, it was no affair of his. Privately, he thought that some people were allowing their young ones to become a little forward, but that was their concern. He threw Jethro's letter in a big bag that would be taken by wagon down to Olney that evening. The long wait for an answer was interminable. I think that'll be one of our vocab too. Jethro tossed at night and wondered, had he done an impudent thing? Did we have impudent? I remember saying, oh, it's an 8th grade vocabulary word. And read The Ransom of Red Chief. Red Chief is considered to be impudent, rude, and out of line. Had he been, was that out of place for him? Was it rude? He had laid himself open to trouble. Had he been a fool to think that a boy of his age might act without the advice of his elders? Sometimes he got up and walked about his narrow room, but that was bad, for Jenny would hear him. Once she came to his door and she was crying. Jeth, what is it? What's bothering you? Ain't we good friends anymore? Ain't you going to tell me? He had to be curt with her to forestall any more questions. After that, she didn't come to his door again, but he knew that if he stirred or moaned under his burden of worry, both Jenny and Nancy would hear him and worry through a sleepless night. Ebbs often repeated, also a vocab word we'll have. I'll be going on soon, Jeth. I won't be a burden to you much longer. Became like the whippoorwill's cry, always the same and never ending. He keeps saying the same thing over and over. Jethro closed his ears to it, but the tensions within him mounted, and the necessity of providing for Ebb's needs in strictest secrecy became a task that seemed to grow in magnitude as the days went by. If I could be sure I'm doing the right thing, he would say to himself as he watched the dark earth fall away from his plowshares. If I could feel really set up about doing a fine thing, but I don't know. Maybe I'm doing something terrible wrong. Maybe the next time they come, the federal registrars will take me. And we have a pause in the page. The letter came one noon when they were all seated at dinner, as so often happened. It was Ed Turner who brought the mail out from town. Jenny ran to the door, eager for a letter from Shadrach. Nancy's eyes pleaded for word from John, but Ed held only one large envelope, and that was addressed to Jethro in a small, cramped handwriting done in very black ink. It was postmarked Washington, D.C. Looks like pretty important mail you're getting, Jethro, Ed said quietly. His eyes were full of puzzled concern. Jethro's head swam. This was the showdown. Now all the family, Ed Turner, and soon the neighborhood would know everything. In the few seconds that passed before he opened the envelope, he wished with all his heart that he had not meddled in the affairs of a country at war, that he had let Ed work out his own problems, that he, Jethro, was still a sheltered young boy who did the tasks his father set for him and shunned the idea that he dare think for himself. He looked at the faces around him, and they spun in a strange mist of color. Black eyes and blue eyes, gray hair and gold and black, pink cheeks and pale ones and weather-beaten brown ones. He read the letter through, word for word, and while he read, there wasn't a sound in the cabin beyond the slight rustle of the page and the shaking hand that held it. When he was through, he held the letter out to Jenny with a long sigh. You can read it out loud, Jenny. Jenny stared at him as if he were a stranger, and she shook her head. It's your letter, Jeth. You'd best do the reading. He didn't know whether he could or not. There was a great pounding in his ears, and his breath was short, but he ran his hand across his eyes and swallowed hard. After the first few words, his voice grew steady, and he read the letter through without faltering. Executive Mansion, March 14th, 1863. Master Jethro Crichton, Hidalgo, Illinois. Dear Jethro, Mr. Hay has called my attention to your letter, knowing as he does the place of in my affection for boys of your age and the interest I have in letters coming from my home state of Illinois. The problem which you describe is one among so many others that has troubled both my waking thoughts and those that intrude upon my sleep. The gravity of that problem has become of far-reaching significance and is one in which the authority of military regulations, the decline of moral responsibility, and the question of ordinary human compassion are so involved as to present a situation in which a solution becomes agonizingly difficult. I had, however, made a decision relative to this problem only a few days before receiving your letter. There will be much criticism of that decision, but you will understand when I say, if it be a wrong one, I have then erred on the side of mercy. So if you made a mistake, it's out of compassion, out of caring for people. The conditions of that decision are as follows. All soldiers improperly absent from their posts who will report at certain points designated by local recruit offices by April 1st will be restored to their respective regiments without punishment except for forfeiture of pay and allowances for the period of their absence. This information you may relay to the young man in question, and I pray that the remorse and despair which he has known since the time of his desertion will bring his better self to the cause for which so many of his young compatriots have laid down their lives. May God bless you for the earnestness with which you have tried to seek out what is right. May he guide both of us in that search during the days ahead of us. Yours, very sincerely and respectfully, Abraham Lincoln. So that last question that you had, I'm going to put that up here. Question 9, from whom did Jethro get an important letter? Abraham Lincoln, oh my gosh. And what did it say? Well, Jethro wrote about the problem with the deserters, and he had just made a decision because hundreds of men, thousands of men had been deserting, and they're losing the men in the army. What was the penalty before? Hanging. They would kill these men if they had deserted. But he's changing that out of compassion. Give these boys a chance. They have to come back, though. They have to report to join back up into the army. I think it's pretty fair. The only punishment is they don't get paid for the time that they were away. So that is the end of our lesson. I wanted to welcome you to my kitchen, which is not really my kitchen. I got compliments on it yesterday of how beautiful it was from somebody. But my kids were in here before, and you may have seen in one of the, I don't know if it was your lesson or 8th grade, where all of a sudden Ruth's head magically appeared off to the side. See where my hand is disappearing? Ruth's head magically appeared there. If it's not in the 7th grade lesson, you want to peek over to the 8th grade lessons. I don't know. It's hard to find. I can't remember which chapter 12 or 13. We had fun with it yesterday. All of the kids were in here, and Adelaide had what she called her invisibility cloak from Harry Potter. She was standing over top of me, and she would move, and I can't make it work. See how it kind of, there's the map behind me. It breaks up. It's so silly. Okay, so that's the end of my goofy lesson. Just in case you're like, wow, Mrs. Weber's house is, yeah, no, it's not. I just have a blank wall back there. Have a great day. Bye.